Hi, I'm Ted. With Harry Shearer retiring, I'm auditioning for any part I can get in The Simpsons. Smithers, release the hounds. Oakley dokley, neighborino. But Dad, I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat animals. But Lisa, animals are so delicious. I have been told many times, I have a face for radio and I have a face for animation.
Ted Cruz, good sport there,
Yeah.
Senator and 2016 GOP candidate, auditioning for The Simpsons with his best impersonations there. But does being a good sport really soften his image, or is there something else behind this viral video that he made at BuzzFeed, of all places? Great place to start our roundtable.
It is, and we'd like to welcome in to our roundtable former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Bill Clinton and attorney David Goodfriend. Also rejoining us, radio host and columnist for the Washington Times, Tim Constantine. And thank you both for joining us. So, what did you think of the impressions that Mr. Cruz gave us right there? We were talking about it. He gave him at least an A for effort, John.
A for effort. David, what do you think?
He did a pretty good job.
Well,
Let's start with you, David.
Yeah, I think the senator deserves credit for a couple things. He's trying to connect with audiences using online social media. I think that's always a smart thing for a candidate to do. He's trying to have a young, hip image. Look, I mean, why did Bill Clinton go play saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show in the early 90s? It's all part of the same thing. The real question, though, is when the public, and in this case, Republican primary voters, already have a certain image of the candidate, is a stunt like this able to soften or change or alter that image, or does it underscore and harden the preconceived conception that people have of Senator Cruz? I think in this case, it's going to be very hard for him to cast himself as a lighthearted, good-humored guy you wanted to sit down and have a beer with, when his whole career has been about throwing bombs and stirring things up. I would have much rather seen him do, if I was his advisor, I would have said, look, you have this persona, you have this image, let's emphasize it. Let's do something that kind of goes with your grain instead of, in this case, what I see is something kind of cutting against his grain. It might come off as a little disingenuous.
Tim, what do you think? I mean, he did read Dr. Seuss, right? So clearly the man likes animated figures, right? So do you think it softens his images, works for him or against him?
Oh, it does. You've heard me talk about before how likability should never be underestimated for any candidate. I talked about how John Kerry lost in 2004, greatly because he's not really that likable of a guy. Bush was vulnerable. Kerry wasn't warm and fuzzy. I disagree with David on one thing here, in that because Cruz has thrown bombs and stirred the pot at times does not make him dislikable. I happen to know Senator Cruz, and he is a nice guy. He is a warm guy. He is an enjoyable guy to sit down and have a burger with. So you can stir the pot and be likable at the same time. I think he does that well, and I think the most important thing is it's easy sometimes when you're here in Washington and you focus on these issues all the time to forget that most of the world doesn't pay attention to all these people. So while we may know Ted Cruz, Joe and Susie Sixpack out there, this might be their introduction to him.
Right,
a lot of people don't pay attention.
And that's what we talk so much about. When we mention those polls, I think this election cycle more than ever, there's so much emphasis, especially for Republicans, to get up there in the polls so they can get up there in one of those top 10 debate stage positions, and you can't get there unless people are talking about you. So maybe those bombs David talked about are part of his whole shtick here, getting people to talk about him. Because I want to talk about social media and the fact that a lot is riding on social media in 2016. Newsweek published a comparison of how the candidates are dealing with social media and their presence, and so far, Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders are the most social of the bunch. Interestingly enough, George Pataki doesn't yet have a presence on Instagram or LinkedIn. And one thing that is quite clear is that if you're running for president, you better have a Facebook and Twitter account to show for it. You see who's using which social media right here on the screen, but also, and this isn't tied directly to the campaign, but according to the Wall Street Journal, global spending on social media marketing will rise by 33% this year. Globally, $23.68 billion. David, how much of it do you think will be spent on social media in this election cycle by the presidential candidates?
Well, for years it has frustrated me that political campaigns of all stripes spend the vast majority of their budgets on broadcast advertising. Broadcast is the least precise, most expensive way to advertise, in contrast to social media, which can be very closely targeted and be a very efficient ad buy. And I mean, I hate to put it in these crass terms, but one of the reasons broadcast advertising has persisted is because media buyers get a higher compensation rate for a broadcast buy than they do for an online buy, which totally distorts the process. And here's why it could be bad for our democracy. The more and more expensive campaigns become, and broadcast advertising is a big, blunt instrument that costs a lot, the less democratic with a small d our system is. If we can democratize democracy with online fundraising and online media buys and targeted, efficient use of funds, then the underdog candidate has a much better shot at competing.
All right, well, we'll get Tim's take on this issue on the other end of this commercial break. We got to go. We'll talk about this a little bit more. We'll also talk about Puerto Rico's debt issues right after this. And we welcome you back into our roundtable. Former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Bill Clinton, David Goodfriend, and radio host and columnist for the Washington Times, Tim Constantine. Good to have you both with us, guys. Tim, going to give you a chance to wrap up here real quickly. David was talking about the money that is spent on television, broadcasting, advertising. Of course, that's still very important, but candidates are learning now they have to have a much more well-rounded portfolio when it comes to their advertising options.
Well, we all know the wisest expenditure of advertising is right here on your stage,
exactly.
Your network.
Thank you. Somebody had to say it. It couldn't
Thank
be
you
me.
very much, Tim. Your check will be in the mail shortly.
You know, David's point is valid, but I think, you know, that's, if you run a good campaign, if you are creative, if you hire the right people, if you have people that understand media, most importantly, if you have people that understand reaching people, then you're going to take advantage of that. We'll call it the Uberization of politics. You know, Uber is a better mousetrap. It's better than your yellow taxi. No offense to my friends at Yellow Taxi. But so if you can find someone who runs a campaign that understands social media for your buck, most importantly, you can focus your message to specific groups.
Yeah, and we saw how the spending is changing, David, to your point there. This does seem to be a democratization when it comes to advertising.
We're learning all sorts of words.
Yes.
Uberization. It's great.
The English language is a beautiful thing. Meantime, let's talk a little bit about Puerto Rico and the debt crisis down there. Take a listen.
Puerto Rico's economy has been in a recession for the balance of the 10 years.
And their debt is not payable.
$72 billion in debt, which is about half of California's debt, and they have 1/10 the population. I mean,
the governor of Puerto Rico says they will run out of cash by mid-July.
The goal would be to achieve a negotiated moratorium with the bondholders to postpone for a number of years the debt payments.
All sounds very complicated, but no matter how you slice it, doesn't sound good. Is this, David, the real debt crisis that we should be focused on here in America more so than Greece?
Well, I don't think that the two are quite comparable. In Greece, you have a constitution that prohibits the taxing of any shipping industry. Just imagine if someone in the United States said, let's have a constitutional amendment to prohibit taxation on online tech companies. Right. People go nuts. Like, why should one industry have an exemption? I think Greece's problem is rooted in their unwillingness to have a fair tax system. But I do think in Puerto Rico, their problem is rooted in the fact that they have all the responsibilities of being a part of the United States, but not all the authority that comes with being a state, because they're a territory of the United States. Let me give you one example. For a long time, there was a part of the U.S. tax code that made it better for pharmaceutical companies to locate their plants in Puerto Rico. This really helped the Puerto Rican economy. And then the minute that tax break went away, the Puerto Rican economy tanked. Now just imagine if Puerto Rico had 2 U.S. senators. Do you think that those senators would have allowed that particular tax provision to go away? No. So here's Puerto Rico trying to carry the burden of running a government like any state would, but not having the authority that comes with statehood. They're put in an impossible position. I don't think that's indicative of the whole country. I think it shows why we need the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, CNMI, all these places where U.S. citizens live and are taxed to have equal rights with their other American neighbors.
Well, David,
as you can imagine, I see the problem a little different than David. I see the problem that they're spending more money than they have. You can make all kinds of excuses. You can blame it on an industry. You can do anything. They're spending more money than they have. When you go to a state like Florida, you know what? They balance the budget every year.
Well, let me ask
There's no
you,
reason
Tim,
Puerto Rico can't do that. There's no reason anybody can't do that.
Let me ask you this, because there was a Washington Post article that brought up that maybe the reason behind Puerto Rico's problems could have something to do with its very high minimum wage. Let's take a look at that. While labor organizers around the country, along with most major Democratic politicians, have said the federal minimum wage is too low, according to the article, it seems clearly too high in Puerto Rico at 77% of per capita income. That puts a lot of people with less education and fewer skills out of consideration for a job. What do you think, Tim?
Well, there's no free lunch, and you mentioned Greece and Puerto Rico, and I'll use Greece as the example in this case, and that is they have a retirement program. They have a very, very generous retirement program. You can retire in your 50s. Matter of fact, depending on what you do, you can retire as early as 50 and then have a full pension when you're done. Somebody has to pay for that. These are great plans. I love free ice cream until you tell me the flavor is tuna fish. You know, there's a great plan if you only hear half the story. Hey, Bernie Sanders, oh, let's give everybody free college. Well, first of all, free college will be worthless, but it also, somebody's paying for it. It's not free.
All right, David,
whether that's
David,
Puerto
last word to
Rico
you
or Greece or anywhere else, the money has to come from somewhere.
All right, 30 seconds left. Last word to you, David.
And where that money comes from is the Onassis family in Greece and all the wealthy oligarchs that have literally escaped taxation for generations. That's got to come to an end. And in Puerto Rico, you can't compare apples and oranges. The raise in the minimum wage is working great in Seattle and other cities. Puerto Rico is different. You can't extrapolate a lesson to the rest of the United States.
All right, there's also some reporting yesterday about the crisis coming to South Florida and other places where we have a high Puerto Rican population. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, that's our roundtable discussion today.
That is, and coming up, we're going to be talking about some money bombs. Are you ready for that? Do it.
Boom.
Boom.
Who's raising what? A huge haul for Hillary Clinton. We'll tell you how much. Hint, it broke Barack Obama's record.